many ways to approach deck building in EDH when you are focusing on flavour over function. Whether you are tying your card choices to Magic lore, art style, broad genres, or a whole separate franchise entirely, there will likely be something in the 20,000 plus legal cards in Commander to help you craft your perfect pile. Today, we'll be focusing on one of my favourite fantasy genres, cosmic horror, and building a deck powerful enough to summon the deep ones. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Man.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today we are going to be doing something a little bit different. We are going to be doing a full-on flavour deck tech for an EDH deck. We've done episodes in the past where we have talked about like some of our deck choices and decks that we've already built for ourselves and how we have this kind of conversation between flavour and function. And that is also kind of like our whole deal with this show, if you haven't picked up already, where we talk about the kind of the story of the cards tell versus the mechanics and do they sync up and all these kind of things. But we've yet to venture into doing a from scratch deck tech, which focuses almost solely on the lore aspect and the flavor aspect over the function aspect. I mean, I don't know, like you're quite a big function guy. I tend to be the kind of sort of feely, emotional flavor guy out of the two of us.
Yeah, over the years, I've trimmed my my fluffy inhibitions down to being to more efficient deck choices. But I mean, even then, like I look through some decks and there are still cards that I refuse to let go of because it feels right for the deck. Otherwise, you do just end up playing, as we found out like last week, like staples are a bit boring. No one likes a stapler. No one wants a stapler for Christmas. That's a terrible analogy.
I mean, I went with it. I understood what you were saying. Yeah, I mean, this is like, Magic's got tens of thousands of cards in it, right? And so I think EDH is no sort of secret that EDH is the format where you can afford to be a little bit more emotional with your card choices and kind of bend to the flavour. Whether that's like a theme within the context of Magic, like say you're doing a Cis-A deck and you want the Weatherlight crew there, or say whether you're doing like a tribal deck is a flavour deck at the end of the day, even if there's a lot of function that's involved with it. Or if you do, like you had your card altar of Joda, Archmage Eternal. Was Thanos doing the snap, like the comic panel, and you wanted to do an end game, like
Joda's Infinity War, yeah, would have been really good. Exactly. It would have been really good, and then we still might do. I tried to fit in the Girana, the companion that the Gruul companion, and it's kind of changed everything because a lot of the cards had like 3 black pips in it or whatever, because they make you sack half your permanents. I'm like, now where do I go? This is actually kind of key to this conversation, because that was the point where I go, where's my flavor versus function bit aspect of this? And it was also a big issue in terms of something like Fantis, the War Weaver was going to be my Black Widow, even though I wanted something lithe and agile. Actually, what turned out a big tarantula that makes everyone fight over her is actually exactly what she was like. So yeah, it is one of those. Yeah, I haven't got around to it probably because when it comes down to flavor, if I really want something to taste good, God, it takes a long time for me to get through the recipe. So,
but that was you building around like an IP that existed, and you kind of think things
real world exactly.
Like another direct sort of franchise, if you like, and then you can do things that are a bit more broadly themed, and that's kind of where we're sitting today. So what we're going to be doing today is looking at one of my favourite fantasy genres, which is the cosmic horror / Lovecraftian horror trope. So this is something that has been around for it's almost 100 years now. So H.P. Lovecraft is what Lovecraftian is named after, and he started writing around the early 1900s, and he was big into this idea of cosmic horror and cosmic I can't quite think of the word. There's a specific word where basically it's the nihilistic feeling that you are so small in the universe that any cosmic powers that are out there dwarf your ambitions into almost nihilism, like things don't matter for you. And he expressed this through like a horror genre. So big tropes of cosmic horror is the idea that there are ancient god-like beings that either come from space and now dwell in the oceans or beneath the earth of the planet, and there are cults that summon them up. There's the idea that there are realms and realities and dimensions beyond human mortal understanding that can be accessed through the occult or through ritualistic religious rites, that if you were to understand them or glimpse them or be exposed to them, your tiny tiny mortal brain would implode with the kind of cosmic eldritch knowledge that would kind of be brought forth. And this genre is so woven, I think, into the fabric of fantasy in general now. So this was, I was saying, this was almost a century ago that this was starting to be written, that now things like D&D has incorporated a lot of this ideology into their fantasy gaming. Like the Warlock class is essentially the Eldritch sort of class. Any sci-fi which deals with different dimensions or kind of sci-fi gods. So the film Event Horizon, for example.
Oh god, yeah. If you've not seen that, go and watch that.
Yeah, exactly. That's a Lovecraftian film. The John Carpenter's The Thing is very much a Lovecraftian trope film, and so it's kind of permeated. There's different ends of the spectrum. So one end of the spectrum is very sort of occultist, necromantic, even things like zombies. So the Evil Dead franchise, for example, takes a lot of its cues from Lovecraft. And then the other end of the spectrum is this kind of sci-fi horror and alien beings from beyond the stars that, a lot of it is to do with possession and implanting yourself into other people, like the Body Snatchers, that kind of thing. And then kind of the sort of core fantasy tropes kind of sits in the middle of both those things and incorporates them all at the same time. I really love this fantasy genre. I will take the caveat now. This is something that's very relevant in Magic today, is understanding where your fandom comes from. There are many writers that were around even at the same time as H.P. Lovecraft, and we'll be drawing influences from them today. H.P. Lovecraft as a person was a complete butthole. He was beyond bigoted and racist, even for his own time and place.
So he's saying a lot for the 1890s.
Exactly. Yeah, like even his contemporaries at the time wrote him letters that are all like, you can read all these correspondence. So it's never explicitly in his works, even though a lot of his works do include terminology for people of different races that we're not comfortable with now. That is kind of a product of the time and isn't excusable, but is just, you understand the context of it. But in his personal correspondence between him and his contemporaries, he expresses complete disdain for anyone of a different religion to him, a different race. He's a complete chauvinist and seems to hate women in many of his correspondence. And a lot of these themes now, you look back at his early works and you look at things like his themes of distrust of the other, alien invasion, occult rituals that you don't quite understand and performed by ancient tribes of people. You see a lot of these bigotries in his work. And this is a very relevant discussion for now, because can you separate the artist from the art is very relevant discussion for Magic in these days, and in fact did inform several card choices that I did or didn't put in the deck because of the conversation that we're having. Sorry, Behold the Beyond, but your illustrator was a bit of a butthole too, and so you're not in the deck. Understanding where his mind was, even if it was a foul and horrid mind, does also open you up to a larger and almost better understanding of his work, and makes his work that much more horrible and that much more scary.
It informs it quite a lot.
Exactly, and whether for better or for worse, that's just the fact of it. And there's many in doing this deck tech, I did read a lot of sort of articles and a lot of breakdowns of writers, of like, Jewish writers and, writers from other ethnic minorities talking about Lovecraft, because like as a white guy, like it doesn't directly affect me, his particular kind of racism. So I wanted to hear from people who it did affect. And there are lots of people in those communities that love Lovecraft but don't love the person. So, there's a big conversation there. And 100 years ago is a long time to kind of dissect his work and to understand his work as for what it was. There is also another side of it saying that the genre very quickly outgrew H.P. Lovecraft. Like, we still use the term Lovecraftian, which is a bit of a bummer, but we can also use the terms like Eldritch and Cosmic Horror. But even writers during his lifetime took his themes and his work and expanded it out so you can enjoy it. And as I say now, it's grown so far beyond the original human who wrote the first few books that the fantasy genre.
Well, Stephen King did a very good job of kind of taking that mantle and kind of pushing and taking it in not quite as in the same extreme, but still had the similar ideas. Like It has a very good is a very good example of the way that a modern translation of Eldritch horror and Lovecraftian horror. This idea of the lights it has in its mouth and everything.
Sure, I think even the lore of It, like the creature from It, is meant to be an alien being.
Exactly. Yeah, one of the old ones. Exactly. Yeah.
100%. So this isn't meant to be this is a deck tech episode. I know it doesn't sound so much, but I think it's just important, and I think it is important for fandoms, especially in kind of geek and nerd culture, where our fandoms often have origins or often incorporate artists, writers, creators who we don't necessarily need, especially if they're already dead. You can't shun people who have passed on. Like, do you know what I mean? But you need to understand where your fandoms come from. And in understanding them, that kind of makes you have some sort of responsibility and some sort of accountability for them. Everyone knows that Lovecraft is complete butthole. It doesn't stop you from enjoying the genre. No. It's just you need to understand that as you move forward.
And it might influence, obviously, doing this understanding and getting a greater grasp of their point of view. It might help inform your, in this specific circumstance, obviously, your deck choices and the way that you want to take it. So, yeah, it's good to have a perspective on your theme, not just to go, I like, I don't know what to say, marshmallows. I don't know why I said marshmallows. But if you don't know where marshmallows come from, how can you have any relevance to them?
Exactly.
I'm not good with the analogies today. I'm sorry, Andy.
Yeah, I don't know. Marshmallows,
staplers, fine. Get it.
All right. Okay, enough with the sermon. Let's jump into the deck text. So I want to incorporate all the themes from Cosmic Horror that we've spoken about. As I go through all the cards, I will also be branching them under themes and kind of have them in subheadings as we go down. I'll be pulling from specific works. So I will mention some books and some literary works and films and things which inform deck choices, but also these are quite big, broad strokes. A lot of the cards have been taken from the sets Shadows over Innistrad and Eldritch Moon, which were literally magics that attempt to do this Eldritch horror, cosmic horror trope. Shadows over Innistrad, the title for that set is a play on Shadows over Innsmouth, which was an H.P. Lovecraft book. So even there, like, you have those kind of deep connections. Thankfully, there are a lot of other planes in Magic because this cosmic horror is so ingrained into fantasy lore that also pull on from these tropes. And there are a few things that I crowbarred in there because I'm not a very good deck builder, and so I've put them in there. And there are also things which I've really wanted in the deck just for its functionality. So I have made up some rubbish about why they're in the deck. This deck, I will say as well, is not a competitive deck. This is a flavor deck. I did still want it to be playable because I'm a player of Magic, and I would feel bad if I built this deck in paper, literally not being able to play any sort of game. So I came at this from like a 2/3 flavor, 1/3 functionality perspective. And you will kind of see how that fits and goes around where we go through the deck tech. But yeah, if anyone is going to be tempted to write in the comments of this eventual YouTube video or in the comments of the podcast, oh, why didn't you put X, Y, and Z card in there? It's probably because the flavor didn't sync up for what I wanted to do. And if you do find cards that fit the flavor and are strictly better than some of my choices, stick them on in the comment sections and let me know, and we'll kind of rebuild the deck together. Okay, the most important part of this deck is the commander. Of any commander deck, it is the commander. And there are a few choices that I went with. The commander that I chose for this deck is Ertai the Corrupted. Ertai the Corrupted is a wizard legend. It's 2 generic white, blue, black, so we're in Esper colors for a 3/4 wizard legend with a blue tap, sacrifice a creature enchantment to counter target spell. This is a pretty cool card. It's a card that is somewhat playable in EDH outside of themes, but you don't see it too often. And there are a couple of different ways I could have gone with this deck. When I first suggested to you, Nathan, that I did Ertai the Corrupted, you were a little bit skeptical because he pulls a lot of his influences from Phyrexia as opposed to like straight horror. Is that right? Like, what were your worries when I sort of talked to you about that?
Well, yeah, I guess the concern was the initial ties to Phyrexia, because Phyrexia is very much like mechanical sci-fi, almost like Borg-like horror, if you know Star Wars. Not Star Wars, Star Trek. So it was more, if you wanted to go more for the unknown, almost ethereal side of it, Phyrexia is very much not that. Phyrexia is tangible, and very much a physical horror. So that was the only making sense. But then even saying that, the idea of this, the thematic of their indoctrination and the cultist fashion of them, they are that kind of almost like a religious cult of a group. So I do I went back. It was more the fact of it wouldn't had you gone down the Ertai side of it, then it wouldn't necessarily work for me. But as him as the head of a Esper deck, which again, colours sometimes also the third of functionality might dictate that you need all 3 colours in there, and that I don't think is much better. And you can argue, like back in the day, even old Phyrexia, there was still an aspect of kind of of this deep-seated kind of that works its way in between the cracks and kind of corrupts you, and that idea.
Mm-hmm.
So it does. Yeah. It's fine. I've taken back on my my initial
so my thinking for Ertai the Corrupted is, if you were to go hard lore on magic lore, he's not the most eldritch thing. So you're right, it's more Phyrexia, but I did have those same feelings about Phyrexia, where if you look at new Phyrexia, how it is now, it is very much the orthodoxy of the machine, and it is still incredibly technological and sci-fi. But if you look at original Phyrexia under Yawgmoth, whilst those elements are obviously still there, it's still very much like sci-fi fantasy. And there are elements of body horror with Ertai. In this artwork, he's got 4 arms, for example. Body horror is one of those big tropes in Lovecraftian lore. The idea that your physical body is actually corrupted by these ancient old beings because you're so imbued with their dark power. I liked the fact that he sacrifices creatures and enchantments to counter spells, because as we see with the rest of the deck, this is going to have some elements of aristocrats and graveyard synergies and some mill synergies as well, so that had all that fire mechanically. But also, like, if you look at Ertai as like a broad stroke, he was a human wizard from Dominaria that when he succumbed to the religion almost of Phyrexia, he became completely corrupted and like fully succumbed to those dark thoughts. And I just thought that really solidified him as being a cult leader of sorts, where he was being indoctrinated into a larger religion. I also think it was really important to have those 3 colours. So the white, blue, black Esper colours, for me, that is what a cult color should be. You have the white religion and sort of society aspects. You have the blue sort of thirst for knowledge, which a lot of cult aspects in cosmic horror books are always looking for, like some sign of the beyond and some larger knowledge. And then you have the black sort of selfish, corrupted ideals as well. So that kind of Esper color wheel was definitely important. The other 2 commanders that I considered was one that you were fairly hot on when I first suggested this deck to you, was Ailey, Eternal Pilgrim, because her story is that she is following the Eldrazi, and the Eldrazi, as we'll come to see in this deck, become very important because they are essentially the flying spaghetti monsters of eldritch horror, which Magic have incorporated into their lore. And her story as Magic the Gathering lore is very much what we would want for this kind of deck. She missed blue. I really wanted blue for this deck, and there are plenty of blue cards that really fit in, so unfortunately she didn't quite make the cut. And the other one is our big bad Emrakul, the Promised End. Emrakul will be in this deck. She is going to basically be our overarching eldritch god that we're trying to summon throughout the deck. She suffers, unfortunately, for not having any colours in her commander colour identity. So I would have to have done a colourless deck, which is just not viable. Both of those options are still in the 99, but Ertai the Corrupted is going to head up our deck. So the main strategy of the deck then, I alluded to it several times there, this is a blend of aristocrats, mill strategy, and graveyard strategies as well. And basically the end point of the deck is we want all of our machinations to culminate in the summoning of Emrakul, the Promised End. This will be our Eldritch God, which we will summon and bring into being, and then we're going to smack our opponents in the face with a giant Eldrazi God. Emrakul, the Promised End, just to read her, a 13/13 Eldrazi for 13 colorless mana. So we're not kidding around with this Eldrazi god. Her abilities are: Emrakul the Promised End costs 1 generic less to cast for each card type among the cards in your graveyard. And when you cast Emrakul the Promised End, you gain control of a target opponent during that player's next turn. After that turn, that player takes an extra turn. She's a flying trample protection from instants. So obviously we could hardcast her with 13 mana. In a theme deck with almost no ramp, that's pretty impossible, I'm not going to lie. So the way we want to do this is by putting permanents into our graveyard to try and bring down that casting cost. As I said, Ertai the Corrupted can already sacrifice creatures and enchantments, so that's 2 card types right there. And we're going to see if we can, fill up our graveyard in other ways as well. She's not going to be the only sort of eldritch god in our deck. There are going to be plenty of others, and we'll get to those in just a moment. But firstly, we need to talk about cults. So, one of the big themes in cosmic horror and Lovecraftian horror is this idea of human cults being offering themselves up to eldritch gods in an effort to either praise them, stave them off, or summon them into our mortal realm. You can see this in a lot of the iconography. So there's, when it comes to Lovecraft's specific stories, the first of the Cthulhu mythos, Cthulhu being the eldritch god that has kind of made its way into the mainstream the most, was Call of Cthulhu. And in this short story, we have a narrator that's talking about all these different tribes across the world, all these ancient peoples who are praising Cthulhu and basically chanting their name to bring them into the mortal realm. And so our cult's going to be based off of that. Almost every other Lovecraft story has an element of cultism in it as well. And yeah, when I was looking through the deck, basically I need bodies to sacrifice. That's my main thing, as well as some utility as well. So we're going to go down the list. First up, we have Thraben Doomsayer. Gather the townsfolk and increasing devotion. These are all cards that can create tokens for you to sacrifice. Pretty simple there, and build up the bulk of your congregation. Rites of Belzenlock is a black saga from Dominaria that has a heavy cleric theme for starters, which is a bit of a flavor win there. Can also create tokens on its first 2 steps, and then its 3rd step also gets extra points for summoning you a demon. We will be looking at demons as well as Eldrazi for Elder Gods, because even though Cthulhu is seen as being like the Lovecraft god, there are actually many Lovecraft gods, and not all of them are spaghetti monsters. Some of them are more like classic demons and devils, so we'll include some demons as well. Hanweir Captain / Westvale Cult Leader. This is a transform card from Shadows over Innistrad. This was actually the card, pretty much, that inspired me to make this deck. This is a card that on the Hanweir Captain side, if you control 4 other creatures, you flip Hanweir Captain into Westvale Cult Leader, and then the Cult Leader can start tapping to make other cultists for you as well. So this is another good token generator, and the flavor for it is really solid as well. Vessel of Ephemera. This is an enchantment that's part of a cycle from Shadows over Innistrad, and this one specifically, when you sacrifice it, you create 2 spirit tokens. Spirits and ghosts, whilst they are in the Lovecraft lore, this one I will say is a bit on the sort of more classic horror side, but there are imagery throughout all these stories that is about these trinkets and vessels and sort of artifacts that cults kind of carry around with them in praise to their lord. And we'll have a whole section on those as well, but this is a good one for the cult. Westvale Abbey is another really good token generator. So this is the land where you can create cult tokens or cleric tokens. Also, extra points for this one being another transform card that when you sacrifice 5, is it 5 permanents or 5 creatures? It's 5 creatures. Yeah, when you sacrifice 5 creatures, it transforms into Ormondal, Profane Prince, which is a 9/7 demon with flying, lifelink, and indestructible and haste. So this is firing on all cylinders for me, flavor-wise. It's also nice to have like a flavor-wise to have like a location for your cult. Many of them in modern stories, it's more that they're in some sort of hideout in the countryside. But in some of the earlier stories, they were often churches that were corrupted, for example. And Westvale Abbey, in the context of Magic the Gathering, is a church of Avacyn that was corrupted to be in service to this demon. We also then have a card which I love. This one is mechanically not good at all in this deck, but is just firing on all cylinders flavor-wise, and that is Welcome to the Fold. So Welcome to the Fold is a sorcery where you gain control of target creature if its toughness is 2 or less. Welcome to the Fold's madness cost was paid, and instead gain control of a creature if its toughness is X or less, and its madness cost is X blue. And the artwork by David Palumbo shows a cult leader putting a robe around a cult initiate. Like that is everything to do with this deck. And I love the idea that whilst we're creating our own cult followers and our own cultists, we can also bring someone else's creature into the fold and potentially sacrifice them in favor to our gods. I just think that's properly everything that needs to be there. Thoughts on my cult followers so far?
Yeah, I like them. I also like the fact that you didn't just go the Shadowborn Apostle route. Because that's one thing you could have done, is you could have just gone, generic, just random clerics and demons. Yeah, easy peasy. But then,
for sure.
But then that you're losing so much flavor at that point because you don't get to have all the texture and everything. I think, as you said, the flip card is one of my favorites. Hanweir Captain, yeah, she's really cool.
I mean, I could have, when I was building this deck, the thing with the Eldritch Horror trope is that there's about, even in the discard cards, which I didn't even which I looked at and then decided not to use, there's like another 3 whole decks in here worth of like EDH decks, and that's just including the ones that I looked at. I'm going to include the link to the Tapped Out in the description box below, which will have our deck list on. And on the maybe board, there are 25 other cards, and those are just the ones that I bothered to type into Tapped Out. Shadowborn Apostles is very good, and if you want to go down the more like demonology route, like that is a deck that exists in many different iterations.
Very hard to build these days, though, because you need like 30 of them, and it's really hard to get hold of 30
really
of them.
hard to get hold of them. But I did also want to focus on the Eldrazi over the demons, even though I am including demons. So there we go. So that kind of makes up the like the bodies of our cult. There are other cultists that I will talk about soon, but those kind of make up the ones which is the kind of core of the congregation. Another sort of big trope which kind of follows all this cult aspect of Lovecraft and cosmic horror is the idea of sacrifice, whether it's ritualistic sacrifice or whether it's people committing like mass suicides in order to offer themselves up to the eldritch gods. And so this kind of brings us into our first sort of real core strategy of the aristocrats build. So I want to fill up the graveyard if I can at any point in the game with creature cards or with different permanents that can be sacrificed, which will make Emrakul ultimately a lot easier to cast. So we have creatures that can help us do this, and these kind of act as our cult leaders, if you like. So we have Aelie Eternal Pilgrim, who we spoke about as being a potential commander for the deck. We have Whisper, Blood Liturgist, Priest of the Forgotten Gods, Skursdag Flayer, and Pious Evangel / Wayward Disciple. So all of these guys act as our kind of sacrifices for our other creatures. I really like Priest of the Forgotten Gods because even though this is a card from Ravnica, it had a real sort of dark religion feel to it. And everything about the flavour of that card, even in the context of Ravnica, suggests that on other planes of the multiverse, there are these hidden deep gods which kind of overlivers don't know are there. So I really like that.
Yeah, especially when you consider that most, like, especially in Magic formats, like the thing that made the Eldrazi kind of the most scary thing was the fact that like it's the first time people weren't really aware of the things that were happening. Most people know, like, oh yeah, we've got demons, we got dragons and stuff. Like, this is all fine, we're used to it. It's quite nice to know that even within the fantasy IP, there are still things that even the people that are in the know don't know. And I guess it's also what made the Nephilim like the first like big cosmic kind of like what the hell are these things? So glad that they went back and delved deeper on those guys, but you know, never mind.
Extra points goes to Pious Evangel / Wayward Disciple. This is another flip card that's very similar to Hamway Captain / Westvale Cult Leader. Pious Evangel can also sacrifice just permanents as well. So if we've got a tricky permanent where we don't have another sack outlet for, like artifacts and enchantments and lands especially are quite hard to sacrifice unless you have very specific examples. So yeah, very cool for that. And also the flavour on Wayward Disciple is really cool, where we see a religious figure literally being corrupted into sort of a dark mirror version of themselves. Really cool. I've also wanted to put Whisper Blood Liturgist in a deck for a long time. I've never
right. She never makes the cut. It's really annoying. Exactly, yeah. You kind of got there are better options. I mean, you'll have the Doom Necromancer you'll talk about coming up, but there's a couple of other ones that are similar like that. I'm like, I just can't afford. And it's not the fact it's a 4-mana thing; it's a 4-mana 1/1. I'm like, it just dies to everything. It dies to a breath of wind. So like, yeah, no. Unfortunately, I'm glad you got her in. Glad you got her in there.
Yeah, for sure. Another card that will also help us sacrifice permanents or sacrifice creatures is Village Rites. Village Rites is a 1 black for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. Pretty efficient, really, in any deck, like mechanically. But flavorfully, it's got Bud Cook is the artist. This is from M21, this card, and is very reminiscent of another Bud Cook card from original Innistrad called Village Cannibals, which was also another card that could have made it into this deck. And the artwork, we spoke about it on the show before, it shows from the point of view of the victim is about to be murdered by a bunch of hooded figures who we assume are like a village cult, which he himself is a part of. And the flavor text reads, "You were so eager to take and consume, yet when asked to give, you refuse." This is a cult card through and through, so it's in the deck. It's efficient as well, which is nice. Death Cultist, Doomed Necromancer, Exultant Cultist, and Selhoff Cultist are all sack payoffs. So these thematically are all pretty solid. So what I want in building this deck, I did go on to things like Scryfall and Gatherer and other sort of card libraries, and I literally typed in the word cultist and to see sort of what came up, because it's not a creature type, but it's a name type. And some of them are really good, like Exultant Cultist, and some of them are terrible, like Death Cultist. But they all make it into the deck, they're all flavorfully on theme, and they all have some kind of payoff when they die. Doomed Necromancer is an interesting one. So Doomed Necromancer reads, it's 2 generic and a black for a human cleric mercenary 2/2. And you pay a black, tap it, sacrifice Doomed Necromancer, and you can return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, obviously, this is good graveyard recursion just for extra bodies, but when we start getting further into the deck, we'll start diving into some of the mill strategies. And one of the big concerns with trying to summon our Eldritch Gods is that we will accidentally bin them as well. So this Doom Necromancer is a really efficient way to be able to play your strategy with almost like no fear of losing your big payoffs for the end of the deck. So yeah, really cool. Really glad he's in the deck there. The last sort of sacrificial cultist that I put into the deck is Blood Celebrant. Blood Celebrant's a little bit different to the others because he doesn't sacrifice permanents or creatures. Blood Celebrant is 1 black for a 1/1 cleric. Pay a black, pay a life, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So you're essentially mana fixing, turning any black lands that you have into one of any color, and you pay some life. And I just like the idea that you are literally giving up your own lifeblood to gain further power to summon your gods. Like that's really sort of like visceral and right there. So I really like it. Yeah, thoughts on my sacrificial cultists?
Yeah, I like them. Even like the kind of I mean we'll shit on death cultists a little, but only because it also works really well with Ertai because you need bodies to sacrifice as well. So the fact that worst case scenario you can counter a spell with it is quite nice, and it's sometimes. I mean, sometimes you've got to sacrifice a little bit of flavor for the a little bit of function for the flavor, and if it still functions directly with your commander, which they will do if as long as they're on a base level of creature or an enchantment, then you can kind of get away with flexing as much as you want to into the flavor side of it, I think.
Sure. So Death Cultist, just to read for you guys, is 1 black for a 1/1. Sacrifice Death Cultist. Target player loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. You're probably not going to get there in EDH with that ability unless you Infi loop it. But
if you do, oh my gosh, you've got.
I mean, yeah. As far as I'm aware, there are no infinite combos in this deck, but you never know. Sometimes weird stuff happens. The last couple of bits for my cult theme that I'm going to touch on is the general cultishness, or I was going to say cultiness, but that sounds too close to something else. So cultishness. So I have Dark Ritual, Profane Procession, / Tomb of the Duskthrows. So just 2 cards. Dark Ritual. Everyone should know, pay a black, get 3 black back. Classic EDH card, classic Magic card, ramps you, very good, has the Dark Ritual aspects of it. And then Profane Procession / Tomb of the Duskthrows is the flip enchantment from Ixalan, and is kind of hard to get off. So Profane Procession is 1 white-black for a legendary enchantment. You can pay 3 generic white-black to exile target creature. Then if there are 3 or more cards in exile underneath Profane Procession, you flip it into Tomb of the Duskthrows, where you can tap for a mana, and then you can play 2 generic white-black to tap it and put creature card that's exiled with this permanent onto the battlefield under your control. So again, it's a little bit like Welcome to the Fold, where you could potentially steal other people for your own cult. It takes a lot of mana. You've managed to get it off on me before when I think in one of our very early episodes we spoke about how you stole my island.
I don't think it's in the deck anymore. I was like, you know what? I think I've peaked. I think that's it.
It's very expensive, but the artwork by Bastien El Dahame is very cool. It shows the cult of the Duskthrows on Ixalan literally at a tomb, and they're all wearing hoods and they're burning incense. And so, yeah, again, Flavour just fires on all cylinders. And also, there's very little white in this deck, so any black-white permanents that fit the bill, I was kind of keen to put them in because I don't really like it when there's only a splash color. I don't know why. For me personally, deck building, splash colors in EDH doesn't really work for me. I don't know.
It's also more annoying for deck building as well because I have a big thing of where I don't mind being solidly 3 colors, but if there's only 1 card in the deck that is like say black in the pits, and every other card in the deck doesn't have double of anything, I'm like, do I really need it? Because it's always that you just know you're always going to find yourself in that situation of where you want the double white or you want the double black. You just typically don't because you went, but I only need like 3 or 4 sources. What's the likelihood? Well, good job, you found it. You found the likelihood. Now you have to deal with it. But yeah, no, I know what you mean. I think that's an aesthetic feeling. You can't say aesthetic feeling, but that is a feeling of aesthetics. I think, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right, and that is essentially my cult. That is the main bulk of them. So you can't really have a cult without having some sort of god, and we are going to include quite a few of them. So our next section are the deep ones. The deep ones in Eldritch lore and cosmic horror are these alien gods, these alien creatures. Sometimes they come from the earth, sometimes they come from the stars, sometimes they're hidden in tombs or under the sea or trapped in icebergs. At other times they're summoned from other dimensions. But these are essentially the ancient beings of the universe that come even before, described in some stories, they are even before the kind of Christian gods of the time, or of the writers that were writing these stories would have been more familiar with. So these are ancient beings of incredible power. Often their imagery is, even though they are described in the books, they're very often followed up with, they are indescribable. So, even though we have a rough understanding of what they look like, and obviously we can, draw them and render them in sort of more modern iterations, in the books they're almost sort of shown as being beyond comprehension as to even what they look like. In Magic the Gathering, this is expressed in the Eldrazi. So the Eldrazi are from the Blind Eternities, which is effectively Magic's answer to space, or a dimension outside of dimensions. And yeah, they're lots of tentacles. That tends to be the theme, because Cthulhu, who is one of the oldest and sort of first gods in the Cthulhu mythos, which it's named after, is described as having a cuttlefish head. So of having
a head, isn't he?
Yeah, well, all of that kind of stuff. Any kind of like sort of like fish person in fantasy lore tends to come.
I guess Swamp Monster as well has the same, almost exact same look.
Yeah,
I thought about that before.
So Cthulhu is described as having giant bat wings, or the wings of a dragon is sometimes described as, having lobster claws as hands and a giant cuttlefish head. And the actual figure of Cthulhu, which first pops up in, again, The Call of Cthulhu, is said to be several hundred feet tall. So it's this giant being. Many other Cthulhu gods also look like this, but many of them don't look like that at all. As we said earlier, some of them have a bit more of a demon-y thing going on. So we include a lot of Eldrazi. We also included a few demons as well. There's obviously no shortage of Eldrazi. Like, take your pick. There's 4 sets pretty much now which have Eldrazi in them. So you have like all 3 you have Originals Zendikar, Battle of Zendikar, Shadows over and Eldritch Moon, and I think they pop up in like core sets and things like that. So you can take your pick from where you get your Eldrazi from. I've tried to go for ones that aren't quite as spacey and are a bit more horror-y, so that definitely bends into the Shadows over Innistrad block, the Eldrazi from there. I've also tried to do ones which you have to kind of sacrifice something or pay some sort of cost to cast them outside of just a mana cost, because I feel that kind of fits the theme of the deck as well. So we have our gods. We have a few creatures that can summon gods just kind of on their own, because there are lesser gods in the Cthulhu mythos as well. And there are also people that have been touched by the eldritch powers and are themselves becoming eldritch horrors as well. So there's a few creatures that fit into that kind of trope. So you have Archfiend's Vessel, Skursdag High Priest, Wharf Infiltrator, Enlightened Maniac, and Pawn of Ulamog. So most of these guys create demons and Eldrazi. Special props goes to Wharf Infiltrator, as the artwork has a creature or a person that looks like they've been touched by the Eldrazi. So they have like squid arm, and they've got a covered face full of like tentacles and all this kind of thing. So those are the cultists that can create their own little sort of demigods, if you like. The main gods, we've already spoken about. The big one is Emrakul, the Promised End. She is the sort of de facto leader of the Eldrazi, if they were to have a leader. But she is the one that is essentially the end of the Eldrazi Titan cycle, that when the Eldrazi Titans come down and try and cleanse a plane and sort of start anew on a plane of existence, she's the one that kind of completes that process. And over the course of Shadows over Innistrad and Eldritch Moon was the Eldrazi Titan in the background, where characters in the stories, you could hear them chanting her name and talking about her, and all the clues pointed towards Emrakul's coming, which is very Lovecraftian.
Considering you got hit by Ulamog, which was the Destroyer, and then Kozilek, which was the Transmuter, and we got to see a lot of those. Not only did we see them obviously in the first set, but even in Rise of Eldrazi, Emrakul was always this kind of thing on the horizon. You never really saw her do much. There is a card that you're going to talk about in a second, which does have her like primarily in the artwork and kind of shows her doing something actively. But out of all of them, she was the one you kind of didn't see do the most. And even though they think they changed the flavour of Kozilek slightly to be a perverter of truth, it was quite nice to see her have this slow influence over a plane. Because when we first saw Zendikar, that there was this aspect when you had things like Eldrazi Temple and stuff like that, where you always had this looming suspense feeling of gods. And then when you actually had the tangible Battle for Zendikar Eldrazi, it's like, so they're all squiddy Titan things. Okay, cool, whatever. Emrakul was still a little bit like, I don't like the fact it can influence you. And I guess is the whole point is when we're talking about like cultists and that kind of thing. The nice thing about this kind of deck is it does feel like you are slowly corrupting, you are slowly influencing not only your opponent's creatures but your own creatures into doing horrible deeds. Not just come in, smash, kill things. Let's have a fight with Gideon.
Yeah. This was very much the idea of why I didn't include, say, Ulamog Ceaseless Hunger or Kozilek Butcher of Truth, because they are very much smashy, destroy Eldrazi, whereas Emrakul, as much as she's a big force on the board, her power is that she takes someone else's turn. Once she's arrived, she's there to kind of sit and be this big sort of rattlesnake on your board. And this is the same for other Eldrazi that I put in the deck. So I put in Drownyard Behemoth, Elder Deep Fiend, and Vexing Scuttler. These three are all Eldrazi from the Shadows over Innistrad block that had the Emerge mechanic. So Emerge is where you can reduce the casting cost of the Eldrazi horror by sacrificing a creature and taking off that creature's converted mana cost in favor of reducing the Eldrazi's mana cost. So I liked that idea again of cultists sacrificing themselves to summon and bring into being these eldritch gods. They are also each one of them is very sort of nautical. So a lot of Innistrad is kind of on the coastline. It's kind of like, a lot of port towns and stuff. And again, in a lot of the early stories, because a lot of the writers around early Lovecraft and early Cosmic Horror lived in and around New England.
Yeah.
So
the Deep Sea is still one of the few places we don't know very much about.
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah. A lot of these Eldritch gods reside in the deep sea, and their kind of temples rise up from the ocean when people kind of happen upon them. So it kind of fits all in really nicely there. They all have flash as well, which is pretty cool. So you can kind of do it as a reaction to something. So that's pretty good as well. Next, moving on, we have two creatures which I think could have taken Emrakul's place. If Emrakul didn't exist as a magic card, these two would have been the kind of lead singers for our gods. And that's Thing in the Ice / Awoken Horror and Dark Depths, which creates Marit Lage. Now, Marit Lage is essentially Magic's first flying spaghetti monster.
She was the OG Emrakul.
Yeah, exactly. So Marit Lage is a 2020 black avatar creature token with flying and indestructible. And then Thing in the Ice becomes Awoken Horror, and Awoken Horror is a 7/8 Kraken horror that bounces all non-horror creatures to their owner's hands. The thing that I really like about these flavorfully, other than the fact of what they are literally as creatures, is that both of these permanents come in with ice counters. So Thing in the Ice comes in with 4 ice counters, and Dark Depths, which is a legendary snowland, comes in with 10 ice counters. And when the ice counters are removed, either by paying mana or by casting instant sorceries for Thing in the Ice, when they're thawed out, that's when they transform. So that's really cool. This idea of something being in a dark slumber, and then eventually, when the time is right, it emerges to kind of, take the souls of men. Really, really on theme. They have their own personal cultist, which should be very familiar to people who do play Dark Depths, in the form of Vampire Hexmage. So Vampire Hexmage is for a black. You get Vampire Shaman 2/1 first strike. Sacrifice Vampire Hexmage, remove all counters from target permanent. So if you have Dark Depths or Thing in the Ice and a Vampire Hexmage, the Hexmage sacrifices itself, you instantly get your giant horror, which, I mean, just that little package right there. This is something that's functionally very viable in EDH, but the fact that it fits so perfectly in our flavor as well is just, 100%. Good. Moving on, we do have other gods that kind of sit on their own. So we have Nemesis of Reason, which has art by Mark Teddin. Nemesis of Reason causes your opponents to mill cards when you attack them. Big spaghetti, horrible monster. The Nemesis of Reason, just the name of it as well, is very cool because it kind of suggests that it's beyond comprehension. You can't even reason with it. You can't even comprehend it. It's very cool.
Yeah, even with the artwork, I'm not entirely sure what I'm looking at.
Yeah, exactly. Where does it start and stop? Who knows? Rexiel the Risen Deep is a legendary creature. It's a legendary Kraken, 5/8, and it's not really in keeping mechanically with the theme of anything else. When it deals damage to a player, you can cast target instant sorcery from their graveyard and then exile it if you were to do so. Island Walk, and Swamp Walk. But the visual look of Rexiel, this image, art by Eric Deschamps, it is Cthulhu.
Yeah, it just needs a flat wings, and then you got it. It's done.
Exactly. His imagery is so based on this idea of this ancient Cthulhu monster that if you didn't include it in this deck, I think you've missed something very, very big there. there's a card in here which I really couldn't resist putting in, even though it really has nothing to do with mechanics either, is Elbrus the Binding... I'm going to try that again. Elbrus the Binding Blade / Withengar Unbound. Yeah, very cool. This is a card I've always wanted to play. So Elbrus the Binding Blade is an equipment, 7 mana cost equipment, which is why it doesn't get played. Equipped creature gets +1/+0. When a quick creature deals combat damage to a player, unattach Elbrus the Binding Blade, then transform it. And it transforms into a 13/13 demon with flying, intimidate, and trample. Whenever a player loses the game, put 13 +1/+1 counters on Withengar Unbound. So, I mean, that's just crazy, right? Mm-hmm. So you have your sacrificial dagger, which is well in keeping with our cultists as well. Your cultist goes in, hits someone with the dagger turns into a giant demon. And even the demon itself, Withengar, again by Eric Shumps, he has a kind of very sort of lots of viscera and tendony kind of look to him. Like there's a few bone plates and spikes and things, but he looks basically like a demon that's been turned inside out, which is very body horror and very in keeping with what we want to do. So yeah, Withengar makes it into the deck. And then we have a few non-creature kind of Eldritch God cards. So you have Eldrazi Conscription, which is, I think is the card that you were talking about, which has Emrakul in the artwork. And it's an enchantment that turns a creature into a 10/10, or a +10/+10, and has Trample and Annihilator 2. Again, this is something which I think fits in with a mortal being corrupted and becoming an Eldritch God, because you're literally bestowing it with the powers of an Eldrazi. And then we have Consume the Meek and Phyrexian Rebirth, which are both board wipes. Phyrexian Rebirth basically board wipes everything, and then you create an XX horror. And then Consume the Meek is you destroy everything with a, was it power?
Converted mana cost 3.
Converted mana cost 3.
This is the one I was talking about. This is the one where it's Emrakul doing something, yeah. Where she's not even really doing it, she's just going, it looks like she sneezed. Like, that's genuinely, like, I think I'm forever going to look at that card and think it's an Emrakul sneeze, because that's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, really cool. I mean, both of these board wipes, they're not incredibly efficient. Again, this is a 2/3 flavor, 1/3 function deck, but they both give you this aspect of seeing these gods either being like rebirthed from the ruins of the mortal world or destroying the mortal world, which is a very, very cool cosmic horror trick. Also on Phyrexian Rebirth, just the kind of the look of the Phyrexian horror that's on it. It is very mechanical, which doesn't really hit our flavor points, but it also has the look of something that is very tendony and body horror-y as well, a little bit like our demon, which is in keeping with our flavor. So, makes into the deck. A couple of honorary mentions for the gods that I didn't include: Gyruda, Doom of Depths, Slorthos the Tidemaker, Mindrack Demon, and Cosmic Horror. There is literally a creature called Cosmic Horror.
Yeah, it's a shame he's not better. I was like, oh, I've never heard that card. Oh, that's why. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as I say, like 2/3 flavor, 1/3 mechanic. He didn't even make that 1/3 mechanic.
Well, yeah, you could have done like Lord of the Pit and other things like that, but I mean, there is just such a dampener on like the upkeep triggers and stuff. It's just not worth it, unfortunately, even if they do have that feeling.
Exactly.
That feeling.
Okay, moving on from our gods, we have the narrator category. So in many of these stories, especially a lot of the earlier ones, you have them from a first person's perspective. So you have some sort of narrator or some sort of academic who's gotten hold of a like a tome or someone's journal, or they've been sent a letter which starts them on their quest. A lot of the stories of the kind of original Cthulhu mythos written by H.P. Lovecraft and his contemporaries, they're not necessarily about defeating the cosmic evils that are around them, but more trying to unravel their secrets. So, I mean, I keep coming back to Call of Cthulhu because that's kind of one of the stories I base a lot of this deck tech on. And it surrounds someone who has a relative's journal, and his relative recently died in weird circumstances, and he finds out that his relative has been trying to unlock this mystery surrounding all these different people and groups of people around the world that have started chanting at the same time, in the same sort of week of a month, the name Cthulhu, and starting to chant their incantations, and then suddenly stopped. So this trope is kind of carried around in a lot of different stories. Is it the Shambler from the Stars, written by another author, also has someone try and translate a book for someone, and it's all this idea that you're an academic and you're being handed these different dark books and you're trying to understand them.
Yeah, what was the one with Johnny Depp in it? That's a really good horror film as well. And slowly but surely he's trying to unravel the mystery. By the end of it, it goes crazy, and he just goes along with it anyway. I can't remember what it is now. Is it Jacob's Ladder? Oh, I can't remember.
I do not know.
Anyway, it's a really good film. It's a similar idea. The whole point is you don't get a perspective. You you can't get a perspective from the cosmic horror, otherwise it doesn't work. I mean, we've had a couple of this in even a Magic story where they try and explain the way they're thinking, and we've seen it from General Tazri's point of view and from Jace's point of view when he's talking to Emrakul. That amazing story where he's playing chess with her, things like that. Like you can't get an unintelligible direction if you don't have a normal person to see it from. And I guess that whole point is that if you did see something from the cultist point of view, it's a very different flavor to the deck. It doesn't feel like it has that similar creeping doom effect. When you're already going, hey, day 47 of cultist, that's our 57th sacrifice this month, like it just doesn't quite work.
Yeah, exactly.
Way. Yeah,
exactly. A lot of some of the more modern stories do have a third person perspective, so it's reads more like a classic novel. But yeah, so we wanted this narrator character. It was The Return of the Sorcerer is the book I was referring to, not Shamble from the Stars. Return of the Sorcerer by Clark Ashton Smith. So our narrator for this deck is going to be Jace. Jace, Unraveler of Secrets. So again, this kind of was softballed in because during the Shadows over Innistrad storyline, Jace was our narrator, and he did find a journal, and it is Tamio's journal, which also makes it into this deck. And it's almost exactly this trope. Like, Tamio was trying to follow the events of Shadows over Innistrad and Eldritch Moon, but couldn't quite make sense of it. And this happens before we, as the audience, and Jace enters the story. Jace enters the story, finds Tamio's journal, and starts trying to go along and unravel this mystery. It's almost beat for beat what you find in these early Eldritch horror stories. We also have two other cards, Pieces of the Puzzle and Pour Over the Pages, which are two sorceries that are essentially draw effects, but they show Jace's journey trying to uncover these mysteries. The flavor text on Pieces of the Puzzle. The clues have begun to reveal a truth I hesitate to accept. That is basically a tagline for this deck and for all of Cosmic Horror mythology. So yeah, he's in, they're in. Very, very cool. Okay, moving on. We have, after the narrator, we have a category which I've dubbed Behold the Unimaginable. So there is this idea, which I spoke about earlier, that a lot of the characters and a lot of the sort of horror aspect that comes from cosmic horror and Lovecraftian horror is this idea that there are things in this universe that you couldn't possibly understand, or that when you do understand them, that's the point in which your mind breaks. It's kind of a meme trope at the moment, where if it's not cosmic horror unless your main character ends up in an insane asylum. So it's this kind of aspect of things. This is where a lot of our mill strategy starts to happen, as well as a lot of our card draw. So I've kind of broken this down into several smaller categories. So first we have Gain All of the Knowledge is my first mini category here. So we have cards like Painful Truths, Peer into the Abyss, and Whispering Madness. These are all instants and sorceries that let you draw cards, but at a cost. So, for example, Painful Truths and Peer into the Abyss, Peer into the Abyss being a new card from M21, you have to pay life, and also they fit really well into the flavor of our deck with what they're trying to tell, the story that they're trying to tell. Whispering Madness is a sorcery for 2 blue-black. Each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So it's a mill effect. It's a wheel effect, which isn't really itself too special for this deck. I mean, it's a Dimir wheel effect, but it has the ability of Cipher. So you may exile this spell encoded onto a creature control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the exiled card without paying its mana cost. And I really like the idea of you giving this ability to a creature, and then the creature is just so insane that they keep throwing away your hand for you and keeps drawing you cards, and everyone else has to mill their hand as well and keep drawing cards. Really helps fill up your graveyard as well. So this isn't just I draw a bunch of cards that I then have to discard. It actually actively helps fill up your graveyard with all different kinds of permanents to help you better cast Emrakul. Also, the artwork is really cool. So it has someone having a whispering little demon in their ear as they're trying to write on their bits of paper. Really cool, really in theme with this deck. So that's Gain All the Knowledge. Lose All the Knowledge is Glimpse the Unthinkable, Paranoid Delusions, and Thought Collapse. So Glimpse the Unthinkable is pretty self-explanatory. It is target player puts top 10 cards of their library into their graveyard. kind of flexible. You could do this to someone else, but I think this is probably going to be done to your own deck to try and fill up your deck with all different kinds of permanents. The artwork for this as well is one that is going to be the key art for the deck. So if you look up our deck on Tapped Out and you see our key art, it's from Glimpse the Unthinkable. Paranoid Delusions and Thought Collapse. Paranoid Delusions is another cipher card which helps you mill as well. And then Thought Collapse is a counter spell that mills opponents when you counter their thing. The imagery on Thought Collapse shows someone literally having the back of their like mind blown apart because they, I guess they can't comprehend their spell being countered, which is really nice and really in keeping with this deck.
Yeah, a lot of discard effects could have very easily, like from a thematic point of view, could have very
100%.
Like thought erasure and stuff like that. Like it just gives that idea of. I mean, we could comment on the fact of like what's the difference between milling and discarding in terms of flavor, but I think 8 Spice Racks already kind of coined that that field. But yeah, it does have this idea of this mind, this idea of your mind not being able to hold all of its information and not being able to deal with it. Glimpse of Unthinkable, as you say, is a perfect card for this deck in flavor. As well as in function. And also the other thing that's good about the decks like this is that can then inform the way that you make your deck function. You go, well, if this is a card I definitely want to be in the deck, and I don't want it just to be there because it seems and it sounds like the right thing, but I also want it to work as a piece. Like, okay, so what other cards do I need to put in to then make the synergies work with each other? And that's kind of where you can start to build this story up a little bit better as well sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. The artist for Glimpse of the Unthinkable, I was trying to find it, is Brandon Kitkowski. So yeah, very cool artist. The other card that kind of fits, there are 2 other cards that fit into this general category. We have Rush of Knowledge, which is another draw effect, but you don't have to like pay anything into it really. So it's 4 and a blue for draw cards equal to the highest converted mana cost among opponents you control. This is obviously helpful mechanically if we do already have Eldrazi out. It does draw sort of cards, but it's the flavor text on this one that I really enjoy. So limitless power is glorious until you gain limitless understanding. Ixtor, Reality Sculptor. So it's the idea that it's all very well and good having the knowledge of, like, say, these ancient tomes until you understand what the ancient tomes and all the ancient religions really mean. And then suddenly things become a lot more difficult to handle. Like, it's really cool. And obviously the idea, I guess, the kind of forethought for Rush of Knowledge is expecting you to then have to discard a bunch of cards out of your hand. So you have all the information until suddenly you can't handle it anymore. And you literally have to put the cards into the bin, which is a really nice little flavor beat there.
Like, it's the same with Peer into the Abyss. Like, there's no way you can keep all of those cards in your hand. Like, most of them are going in the bin.
Although, interestingly, I did get peered into the Abyss a couple of days ago, and I did have a Thought Vessel, which is also a card in this deck, which was very good. I think then someone did, after like 2 turn rotations, blow up my Thought Vessel, and then I did have to bin a bunch of cards. But for 2 turns, I had a hand full of, like, I think it was something like 38 cards.
Even from a functional point, that's horrible. You end up going like, I don't even know what to do. I've probably got something in here. Give me 10 minutes to find it. Yeah.
Yes.
The burden of knowledge.
Exactly. Well, the burden of knowledge, it brings me nicely onto the last card in this little collection, is Price of Knowledge, which is an enchantment. 6 and a black. Players have no maximum hand size, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Price of Knowledge deals damage to that player equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. So this punishes opponents rather than you, but I do like just the flavour of it is just incredible. The Price of Knowledge is literally what we've been talking about just now.
I feel like it's funny that if you do end up doing the Rush of Knowledge of a huge amount, you don't pay the price for knowledge, weirdly enough. You go, no, I'm okay, this is fine. I haven't got any eyes, but it's fine.
The artwork, exactly, you just brought it up. The artwork by Dan Scott shows some sort of cleric or scribe maniacally laughing over a pile of books which has a bunch of blood on it, and you can tell that the blood is also staining his hands and his eyes have been burst, so it's clear that he's
I think he's plucked them because they think that in his hand.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
in fact, it has no flavour text, but there's so much more flavour to this card than say Rush of Knowledge. I think it's a good signifier. Dan Scott, you did a great job there, buddy. Horrific artwork.
So what are these ancient tomes, and what are these scriptures that tend to pop up in cosmic horror and Lovecraftian lore? The big one, and the one which, because there are actually quite a lot of books, as there are also quite a lot of gods in the mythology, in the extended cosmology, if you like, of Cthulhu lore. But the main one is the Necronomicon. Now, the Necronomicon is also known as the Book of the Dead, or various kind of names surrounding that. Almost every writer that writes about the Necronomicon gives it a new sort of name hovering around that theme. And this is where we start to kind of have a bit of fudgy-wudginess in the lore, because whilst the Necronomicon was first referenced by Lovecraft and then very quickly by other writers that were kind of writing at the same time as him, it's kind of been in the fantasy mainframe for a while now, and it kind of bleeds the line between cosmic horror and zombie horror and sci-fi. Everyone kind of uses it in a slightly different way. So, for example, the Evil Dead books, or the films, sorry, have the Necronomicon in the films, but it's very much the Book of the Dead, which they use to summon up demons that are more like necrotic zombie demons than they are like eldritch demons. So what I've done here is I've kind of gone along with that theme because it's a bit easier to do, and I've included Grimoire of the Dead, which is the magic card that I've kind of stuck in for our Necronomicon.
Did you say?
Grimoire of the Dead?
Grimoire. Grimoire.
Oh, there we go. Do you know what? I've never known how to pronounce that word, and I thought I'd have a punt, and then you corrected me.
I'm glad you punted. I'm not going to lie. That makes you... yeah,
I'm glad you corrected me. All right. Grimoire of the Dead, which is essentially Magic's Necronomicon.
Yeah.
So Grimoire of the Dead is a 4-mana enchantment. So you pay 1, tap it, discard a card, which helps us to put a study counter on Grimoire of the Dead. Grimoire, sorry, and then you can tap Grimoire of the Dead to remove 3 study counters from it. Put all creatures from all graveyards onto the battlefield under control. They are black zombies in addition to their other curdlers and types. So again, zombies as opposed to demons, but there are stories in the Cthulhu mythos of people who read these ancient tomes and then suffer some kind of dismemberment. So, for example, The Return of the Sorcerer, which was a story I referenced earlier, has someone reading the Necronomicon, and then the person who's gifted the Necronomicon to our reader divulges that their associate is all chopped up into bits, and then they go into the other room and the person's arms are moving around and the head is still active, and it's like haunting them in this dismembered state because they've gained powers from the Necronomicon. So there are some sort of necromantic themes and flavors to these stories, which I kind of had to lean in a little bit for this flavor pick. Other cards that kind of follow in the Necronomicon way are Obsidat's Aid, which is the sorcery that can return target opponent from the graveyard to the battlefield, and Phyrexian Reclamation, which is an enchantment that you pay 2 life, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Phyrexian Reclamation, again, a Phyrexian card, but this one's particularly, the RK post artwork does suggest more of a ritualistic summoning as opposed to like a sci-fi technological one. So it made into the deck.
Yeah, I think they moved deliberately away from the whole culty aspect of it to be more of a scientific kind of aspect. I think probably deliberately because they did the Eldrazi and they wanted to separate the two of them. But yeah, back in the day, the Phyrexians did have... I mean, the Yawgmoth turned into a giant death cloud. You can't get much more like cosmic and weird than that, I don't think. So yeah,
no,
I think old Phyrexia is very fine to look into a little bit. Plus yeah, the theme's very strong there.
Yeah, for sure. And then the last one is Extract from Darkness, which is a sorcery where each player puts the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard, then puts a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. This one's maybe one of the weakest cards in the deck flavor-wise, but the artwork shows a creature coming out of a sewer, which has kind of an eldritch feel to it. And it does get stuff out the graveyard, which will help us in our sort of mechanical efforts. So this one, I think out of all the cards in the deck, this is the one where the flavor is sort of there, but the kind of 1/3 mechanics philosophy that I've gone by pushed this one into being included into the deck. Because mechanically, it's got graveyard recursion and mill, and it's got a bit of an eldritch creature on it. It's in Dimir colors. It can go in the deck. So yes, there we are. We're almost at the end. We're almost there. So the last main category I've got, unless I've missed something huge, is Dark Idols. So again, referencing Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft, one of the big clues in that story, which our narrator looks at to kind of then find out about the cult of Cthulhu and to find out how this eldritch god is in existence, is he comes across an artifact, which is a stone idol made of a stone which no one can really figure out what the stone is. It's a big meteorite that doesn't seem to have any sort of earthly bound to it. And this is where we first get the first impression of Cthulhu themselves. The idol is a carving of Cthulhu. So this is where we get our description of it having a cuttlefish head and lobster arms and bat wings. And this idea of idols and artifacts and arcane objects that hold some sort of power, either to summon gods or to be a representation of them that you worship, is very prevalent in a lot of these different kinds of stories. And so that's what we're going with here. For example, again, another good story which we have someone looking at an arcane artifact is the Clark Ashton Smith story, Ubo Sathler, which was part of that first wave of Cthulhu mythos stories, where someone looks into an orb that transports them so far back in time that all is left is this ancient eldritch god, Ubo Sathler, kind of almost before the Big Bang. So he's just kind of floating there as this sort of big consciousness. So this is where I wanted to go with these ones. The kind of direct idols of our ancient gods are represented as Ancient Stone Idol, Idol of Oblivion, and Shrine of the Forsaken Gods. Ancient Stone Idol and Idol of Oblivion are artifacts that essentially can become big creatures, and then their artworks are based off of the land Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, which is a land from Zendikar, which depicts the three gods of the Zendikari religion, which is Ula, Emeria, and Kozai, which we find out in the story of Zendikar are actually misinformed representations of the three Eldrazi titans. So I kind of feel like this was almost an auto include in these decks, and why at first glance, if you were to just look at these on the tapped out, if you were just to put it into creatures and then you saw that I had Ancient Stone Idol in the creature section, you might not quite get where my thought process was. But if you look at it from this angle of seeing that these are representations of eldritch gods, which people still don't quite understand where they've come from, it fits almost perfectly into what we're trying to achieve. And Emeria obviously being the representation of Emrakul, who is our big bad god in this set. Mechanically, Shrine of the Forsaken Gods also taps for extra colorless mana, which helps us again cast Eldrazi. So it's all there really. And out of all of the kind of flavor picks for this set, this is the one which I was actually like surprised at how well it fit when I kind of first looked at it. I was quite happy with those.
Well, also the thing that you've done here is you've definitely touched on all of the different aspects. So you could very easily just focus on the cult and the deep ones, or you could specifically go down the mill discard route if you want to go for the descending madness that people have, and then go through reanimation thing of where going, not only am I going to blow your minds, but I'm going to bring back the gods that you believe in back to life. I mean, you can flex the flavor of this very, very comfortably in the direction. It's quite nice that you've touched on every aspect of it to kind of make it all work together as well. So you've got like a story as you go through the cards.
Indeed. Just the last couple of bits then, just to round off the deck. The mana rocks that I've included also in the Dark Idols category are Sol Ring, Thought Vessel, and Arcane Signet. Sol Ring is a bit of a cheat. This is a real cheat, this one. The flavor text is, Lost to Time is the artificer's art of trapping light from a distant star in a ring of purest gold. It had the word star in it, and I wanted a Sol Ring.
Oh god, amazing.
Cosmic horror, star, sure.
You know it gets worse when you try and justify it, right? You could just go, hey, Sol Ring, and everyone goes, yeah, cool, right, fine, Sol Ring.
Well, no, I feel like I have to justify it. Arcane Signet is really is more to do with the name, but it also helps with the fact that it taps for colorless mana, and Thought Vessel also helps with our ridiculous draw effects. But I like the idea of there's this idea that your thoughts and your kind of consciousness can be trapped in an artifact, which is again something which pops up from time to time in Eldritch stories. The lands, I haven't really talked about the kind of bulk of the lands. I've touched on a couple of specific examples. So I put in the Theros temples, the Temple of Deceit, Temple of Enlightenment, Temple of Silence. Visually, they're not really on point flavor-wise, but I think Deceit, Enlightenment, and Silence are almost three perfect words to describe like any cult. Temple of the False God, which is the taps for 2 colors if you have 5 more lands. Temple of the False God, very much like Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, kind of fits into that flavor as well. I've included the Shocklands, Watery Grave, Godless Shrine, and Hallowed Fountain, because each one of those, with a little bit of bending, have kind of eldritch connotations. Hallowed Fountain and Godless Shrine are holy places. Godless Shrine is obviously very apt. And then Watery Grave kind of again fits in with this kind of dark depths aspect that we're trying to go for. And I also included Tainted Isle and Tainted Field, which are the lands where they can tap for both their colours if you can control a swamp. So it's the Dimir one and the Orzhov one. Again, because of this idea of corruption of the land, I quite liked. the rest of the deck's pretty much basic lands. Oh, I also added in Drownyard's Temple, because that is, as far as the story of Shadows over Innistrad goes, that is the kind of main location of the portal that summons Emrakul. So I just kind of think there's a little nod, like Drownyard Temple's pretty good. Is also, mechanically, you can return it from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So if you do end up milling it, you can also bring it back. And then Arcane Sanctum is the Tri-land. Again, the artwork is pretty good for kind of an Eldritch thing. It's kind of an Arcane Sanctum that sits just outside of time in a different dimension. So I kind of liked the sort of the look of it for the deck. I wasn't going to include the Tri-land unless the artwork kind of fit in. I think we just about got there.
Yeah.
The rest is basics. You can have fun with the lands, I think. I put the rest as basics because I kind of like the slightly less tuned mana base for a very untuned deck. And the artworks I went for, because this is important. I went for all Shadows over Innistrad, and specifically I went for the Jonas de Roe Island, which is the one which has the lighthouse and the kind of typhoon spouts in the background. Very cool. I went for the Adam Paquette Plains, which at first glance doesn't really seem that eldritch until you look at the skyline and you see that all the clouds are forming like a lattice, which could be tendrils, or as very sort of Phyrexian lattice in the sky, which is very foreboding, very cool. I think, was it Stranger Things, the TV show Stranger Things, relied a lot on that iconography for their third season of this kind of thing in the clouds. Really cool. And the swamp I went for was the Andres Roja swamp, which shows a Cryptolith statue, which I didn't include very much in the rest of this deck. So the Cryptoliths on Innistrad are the stone sort of markers, which kind of are part of the clue network, which Jace follows to try and find Emrakul. And I didn't include a lot of iconography of the Cryptoliths. I could have leaned into it, but I thought this swamp was also good enough to make the cut. And there we are. An hour and a quarter into it. We're done. So that is my 100 card pile for Lovecraftian Eldritch Horror Cosmic Horror deck. I actually think it will play okay. I am planning to build this in paper. I've got about 2/3 of the cards in my collection, which is, again, kind of why I looked into building this just myself and then thought it was maybe deep enough to do an episode on. I'm missing a few cards. Dark Depths is going to be a card that I will have to invest in.
It's also probably better to get it now whilst the price has dropped a little from the Master Set.
Well, yes, just got reprinted, right?
Yeah,
there is another card that summons Merit Lage, which I don't think quite works.
That's a Slumber, isn't it? The Slumber of Merit Lage.
Yes, Merit Lage is Slumber.
There we go. Yeah, it's a lot takes a lot longer to get it off. So let me check quickly what it does. If you have 10, it's no permanence. So you could.
Oh, yeah, it's all snow permanence.
Yeah. That leads more into her Ice Age influence more than the fact that she is an Eldritch Horror influence. But
yes, exactly.
Yeah, it makes sense. Because I think the only other way I could think, because I thought as I was going through, it's when you got to Temple of the False God. I'm like, oh yeah, because you have the artwork of the one where it's what's her name, fish girl, Kiora. Jumping out of the water, whereas the other one's a temple devoted to Corona, who was the false god. And I was thinking, if you did have reasons to want to go 5-color, then Corona is a very good option for this, even if she is a bit jankier on terms of like viability.
Oh no, I 100% agree. I put out a little teaser for this deck on Twitter quite a while ago, actually, now, like sort of 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I put out 3 cards on the deck without the commander, and I said, try and guess what we're going to do. And immediately people were like, oh, Eldritch Cosmic Horror, but they were trying to guess the commander, and Corona was the one that popped up. So I completely agree. Having a false destructive idol of a god is very much like sort of in keeping. And actually, 5-color would help me include a lot of the red cards, and actually, obviously red and green are the 2 colors missing, but there are a lot of red cards specifically Molder sets that I could have fit in, and there's a lot of green cards from Shadows over Innistrad that I didn't include, like Emrakul's Evangel. That would have been perfect for this deck, or even Stromkirk Cultist, which is a red card.
Yeah. I guess you could also technically go, if you wanted to, go Nephilim, and if your group's going to allow for it, if you wanted to go fight. I mean, I get the whole point is if you're going with a flavor build, then it's very rare that your group, unless you've made a really competitive flavor deck, which good God bully to you. There's very rare they'll turn around and go, nah. If anything, if someone goes, oh, I've done a chair deck, I'm like, well, sit down, sir. Let's come and play it. I want to see what you've done. So, there's obviously
for sure.
Game. Yeah, and you've even got a big ass maybe board, haven't you, of other cards that you couldn't make fit, or didn't fit maybe your specific flavor of it. So obviously this is kind of like a not subjective, but I mean it is also very subjective.
Sure, a lot of the ones that I put in the maybe pile that is on tapped out, because again, as I said, there's about another sort of 2 decks that I didn't even type in. There's just like little subtle things. So if you wanted to go, if you weren't really that fussed about direct references, but more about just the feel of like Eldritch Horror, there's cards, for example, like Nagging Thoughts, which is 1 and a blue. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them to your hand and the other into your graveyard. It has Madness. A lot of these cards have Madness, I realised, or Delirium, which is another mechanic from the Shadows over Innistrad set. Which, if you were to do just cards from Shadows over Innistrad, maybe put Corona as the commander so you can have 5 colours, but the bulk of the deck, if you were to just do Shadows over Innistrad, you could do a really good Cosmic Horror deck that really fits in with the flavour, because I think they nailed it for that set. But I wanted to kind of branch out and do a few other bits. There are also cards which functionally have no plausible intent for the deck, but just the name of it was really good. So Descent into Madness is an enchantment from original Innistrad, which I could have put in there. Cosmic Horror, again, is one that we mentioned before. Cultist Staff is just an equipment, +2/+2.
It's hard as there are some cards you have to go, well, I just can't justify this. It's sometimes really hard to justify the flavor side more than the function side. I guess it depends on how much you value like your play experience compared to like viability to win or at least influence the game, because most of the time I don't care if I win or not. I just care about if I get to do something silly, and if your deck doesn't even get to do something silly, then what was the point, you know?
Exactly. So there we are. Guys, I'm going to put the tapped out link in the description below if you haven't already been following it as I've been talking. Say if you've been listening on public transport, it's a bit hard to do on your phone, but do check out the tapped out link. I've put everything into their custom categories as well, so you can follow it along a little bit better. Let us know what you think of the deck, whether you think that we sacrificed too much mechanical influence for the flavor, whether you think that actually some of our mechanical throw-ins were a bit of a cop-out and you would rather have seen us go full flavor. Also, let us know on Twitter at mtflavouring what kind of flavor builds you want us to see us do in the future. So we've already mentioned that Nathan has been trying to build something that's based directly on an IP.
You know, I might do off the back of this. I might do that, because I don't have to necessarily make it in paper to justify it. And I've got a fair amount of random text written in my notes that should probably be put to use, and not just something I look at every now and again and sigh to myself that it's not going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. Or if you'd rather see us do a flavor deck tech based around Magic the Gathering lore. I mean, like Lord knows there are people that do like guild decks or do based around a legendary creature, or they do storyline decks.
Or block decks, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Let us know what kind of builds you want to see us do, because we're not overly fussed about building tier 1 commander decks, but we do like building.
We've done enough of that, haven't we, Andy? We've built enough tier 1.
Oh yeah, in our personal collection. But we do like making functional flavor decks that work as well as like kind of spark joy. So let us know. Emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. Check out our YouTube channel. This will eventually be on YouTube. So if you are watching this on YouTube now, then you're listening to me talk in the past about you watching in my future, but you're present. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, then if you want to see it in visual form, it will be up on YouTube in a couple of weeks' time. MT Flavouring. Magic the Flavouring is our YouTube channel. It's all the same. You know where we are. My personal Twitter is at AndyManface. Nathan's, yours is
at the Fox in the Moon. I put a post up and no one even liked it. So I don't even see the point anymore. It's no point in living. Yeah. Well, off the back of that, we will talk about Secret Lairs next week. Don't worry, we haven't ignored them happening. We just needed some.
Oh, for sure, yes. So to kind of put a time date on this episode, there have been 2 new Secret Lair drops: Prime Slime, Time, Mime, whatever it is, the slime one, and the one with the dogs. Yeah, I don't know what their names are, but we will be talking about them next week.
Oh, what, the actual dogs? Oh, well, yeah, they made sure to put it in the flavor text. Don't worry. Anyway, that's next week.
All right, guys. Well, other than that, thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.